The next speaker is Mr. Sharad Arora. He will be talking about telematics and IoT ecosystem in India. He is the founder of Sensorized Digital Services. He is serving as a vice chair SGSS, and he's a member of GC TSDSI. He's a technological evangelist and whose expertise is in various telecom domains. I mean, he was the author of multiple white papers and reports in TSDSI. Without further ado, Mr. Sharad, you can take over, please.
Professor Ganti, good morning to you. Good morning to the panel. Good morning, Professor Desai, Dr. Abekar Andikar, Dr. Vanka Sundar, and the very esteemed audience today. In this adjusted time, we are a bit behind. I will try to cover 5 minutes to discover with the audience the Nirbhaya framework case study for standardization, and then another 5 minutes for what learnings are apparent for IoT and smart cities, and then maybe leave open 2 minutes for the question answer. So there will be a little bit of a rush on the slides, but I will try to keep it together. I get straight into it. The government's role in developing standards is the most easily visible with the Nirbhaya framework. I think we are all familiar with the 2012 story, and that led the government to forcefully say that public transport had to be made safer. And in order to do that, the services of ARAI were commissioned. The Ministry of Women and Child set up a fund. It was administered by Department of Economic Affairs. And Ministry of Road Transport and Highways took the first initiative to see how standards and technology could help this very important public service initiative. In a couple of years, AIS 140 was developed. AIS 140 is Automotive Research Association of India's standard, developed with public consultation for vehicle tracking, camera surveillance, and emergency button. And after the standard was published, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways MORTH took out the AIS 140 notification, which mandated that every public service vehicle will have a vehicle tracking device, one or more emergency buttons. And this diagram that you see of vehicle tracking and alarms management is now synonymous with the telematics ecosystem in India, and to my mind, very similar in its impact as, for example, Aadhaar to identity started to become possible. The AIS 140 standard brought in many standards-driven changes. Innovation came into maps. Innovation came into the Indian IRNSS, NAVIC as it is called. The simultaneous development of the multi-profile SIM became a reality. And all of these things came together because Indian technocrats, Indian intellectuals, Indian entrepreneurs got to work to develop what can be called a completely new ecosystem, standardized and based upon local requirements. And over this entire journey is starting 2016. So sometimes people say it takes a long time. It does take a long time, but the effect of a standards-based approach in the ecosystem is incomparable with what it can do. Besides addressing the safety requirements of the primary objective, AIS 140 now with its capabilities is this central vehicle tracking platform initiative has now accelerated the entire vehicle diagnostics and service management. It is going to impact road safety and infrastructure improvement. It is very likely that because of what happened with AIS 140 and because of what happened with FASTag, it is now possible that India will dramatically improve the speed on its highways because you can take away the tolls and you can do everything with positioning, digital positioning. And of course, the natural impact on efficient fleet management. And going forward, I think the impact on insurance. So what started out with the government initiative of Nirbhaya, MOTS initiative with AIS 140, eventually led very, very strongly to the creation of an entire ecosystem. The important thing, the heartwarming thing that I wish to bring to you is, and it's very important that you see it that way as an audience. I'm sure there are students, and I'm sure there are academicians, sure there are policymakers, that the approach to making a standards-based development and then uh, the compelling and committed approach towards standards proliferation, including using government funding, model RFPs, and state-by-state implementation of those model RFPs, created what can today be called very proudly as a completely new mini industry. What you see here is a live picture taken yesterday from Vahan. Vahan is the cloud for Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. And there are so many things to identify to a research-based audience here, that a standards-based approach today has in excess of 113 manufacturers in India, 113 manufacturers, 183 retrofitment centers, 10 back-end providers, and this is just the start of the journey. But this is, I can say very proudly, this is a government site. This is a website which you can go to. There's a link here at the bottom. But when you take the standards-based approach, you create an outcome that is remarkable in its quality and can be dramatic in its economics and the ecosystem development. So what are the lessons here for IoT and smart cities? This impact and the TSDSI role, together with the role of the academia and our intellectual capital in this country, to create standards-driven sustainable ecosystems, is really the most important aspect. Most of you will now be familiar, because for 5-6 years now, this message that IoT is going to be huge is very clear. How huge, nobody really knows still, but it will be huge, and be assured that very soon there will be more cellular connected IoT devices than there are mobile phones today. And it is going to impact virtually every industry vertical. I just spoke a little bit about transport, and even in transport, just public service safety vehicles. But it's going to impact manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture, retail, mining, airports, utilities, manufacturing, ports. The important message here is that these are candidates that are likely to bring along the need for standardization. When we will look in time, Dr. Sundar just described a little bit about Wi-Fi 6 here at the top. Earlier, Dr. Karandikar talked about 5Gi, and he just spoke about one aspect, the 5Gi radio interface technology. These are going to be, if you look at the broad sense, a successful IoT project is going to be utterly complex, and things become simple if they are orderly. As a result, to this audience, there is a very important aspect. I show here a little bit about what global research says regarding just one aspect, the connectivity issue, because we are right now in a communications session. I picked out the connectivity issues, and look what the researchers across the world are saying. To what extent did resolving connectivity issues help the project? Greatly, 76%, somewhat 16%. 92% projects were otherwise suffering heavily from complexity in connectivity issues. And if you can see here, the arriving space, the heavily fragmented communication space, which Dr. Vanka spoke about a little bit, of overlaps of various different technologies, is going to require a very, very standards-based, very well-defined approach. Otherwise, we could, when you don't have a good implementation, usually the thing that suffers is proliferation. And when proliferation suffers, investments that people have made don't get recovered. So I'm trying to connect the economics with the research and with a standards-based approach to basically say that IoT is going to be large. There's no doubt about it. In India, the telematics ecosystem has shown how a standards-based approach can lead to proliferation that is responsible and orderly, and that because it has been led by standards. That because an AIS 140 standard was written, after which COPs were written, after which model RFPs were written. So the entire approach is what I'm trying to point to. As you can see in this slide, the purpose here is to simply state that if you look at the diagram here, ISO, SAE, IEEE, IETF, ETSI, CEN, CENELEC, the number of standardization bodies and the number of standards, those themselves are going to be very large. I'm trying to make the point that unless India knows what it needs, how much of what it needs, what are the local effects that it must have, it could be a maze which is hard to navigate. So remaining in step is challenging yet very critical. And that brings me literally to the very last message, which is that we must have a disproportionate share of the $1 trillion global IoT business. It is imperative for our healthy growth and development. And for that, as Dr. Karandikar said, participation is critical. We have to persevere. We have to create Indian standards and Indian contributions to global standards, both of them. And that will lead to local capability development and intellectual property creation. And the role of the government, that of Indian academic institutions, is critical, because these are all cutting edge technology areas, and there are so many and in so many verticals that without the assistance and the full shoulder of the capability that there is in the academic institutions and the government, it is very unlikely that the industry will come up to the cutting edge that it is required to be. And if it does come together, then it's very, very certain that with the kind of intellectual capital that India has, with the kind of demographics that it has, we can join hands with the technical fraternity to create a vibrant Make in India, which will affect IoT, 5G, smart cities ecosystem with standards-based approaches that have world-class capabilities. So my very last message is to warmly and passionately invite academicians, technocrats, intellectuals to join TSDSI, to join the journey of standardization and move forward these ecosystems in a manner that we can, as India, take a large share of the global action. Thank you, Professor Ganti. I return it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharad. I mean, it was a wonderful talk on hearing how India could get together to build this AIS 140 standard. I mean, it's a pretty complicated thing, but we're able to do that. Similarly, on the IoT landscape, we understand it's very, very complicated, but I think it's very important, given the size of IoT proliferation, that India has to have a part of it, and we should be engaged in the standardization activities of IoT from the beginning. I think it's important. So with that,